Today we welcome to the course Jakob Svensson, Professor in Media and Communication Studies at Malmö University. Hello Jakob, and thank you so much for joining us. You have been researching programmers and their cultures for your upcoming book, The Wizards of the Web. What can you share with us about your experience and learning about algorithmic bias?
Hey, Anna Maria, and thank you so much for having me on this course. It's indeed a pleasure to be here and to talk to you. Now, algorithmic bias was actually the whole starting point for me writing this book, The Wizards of the Web. Now, what I'm interested in was the humans behind technology. The humans, the developers, software engineers, and designers of algorithms. And of course, I depart here from an idea that technology is not neutral. When I applied for research funding that was behind this, that has financed my work writing this book, there was this idea that algorithms were neutral. Now, by focusing on the humans behind the algorithms, I wanted to highlight that technologies are indeed imbued by social, cultural aspects, such as the programmers themselves, their cultures, and where they come from. Now, to give you an example, here in Malmö, where I'm located, I was interviewing a group of app developers for telephone apps, and they were developing a dating app. And they were a bunch of young white guys in their mid-20s, and they were thinking about what would a perfect dating app look like, yeah? And they were sitting there and brainstorming, and one of the features they were discussing was to have a GPS function on their potential love interest, to know exactly where in the city the ones that they were interested in were located. Now, it wasn't until there was a female developer who entered into the team that they realized that they had created a stalking app. But when they realized that, they were quick to dismantle the whole project. Now, this highlights what is perhaps a little bit more known today, that technology and programmers' culture are indeed very masculine, and that programmers are predominantly male. Another bias that has been highlighted the latest years is that around race and ethnicity. We all remember in 2015 the infamous Google's face detection algorithms, which suggested that people of color were gorillas, or they couldn't distinguish between gorillas and people of color. What I want to highlight, and what I found conducting my research, doing interviews with programmers around the world and visiting headquarters, is another bias, and that is around age and ageism. Because programmers are incredibly young in terms of age, but also in terms of how the workplaces are laid out. For example, I was lucky enough to conduct interviews and visit the headquarters of Google and Facebook in Silicon Valley. And what I saw there is perhaps what has become emblematic of a tech headquarter. I mean, bean bags all over the place, ping pong tables, a bar when you can go and get your drinks, also a gym, a cinema hall. I mean, fantastic for people in their mid-20s who don't have any family responsibilities to spend their entire life almost at these companies. But what happens when you become a parent and get kids and need to leave at 5 to pick up your kids at daycare? You could really see how this whole workplace setup was not geared towards, or were only geared towards young people who were dedicated to spend their entire day and free time also at the office. So I think algorithmic bias is important, and there are increasing awareness around this, especially in terms of gender and ethnicity, but we shouldn't forget also biases in terms of age and ageism.
Very, very interesting, and something indeed that we need to talk more about. So, if you are a business or an organization who already is about to implement who is about to implement algorithms in their workplace, how can you identify algorithmic bias? Is there any way you can see and evaluate whether or not this bias happens in your workplace?
That's a very interesting question, and I kind of depart from an idea of technology as a social-cultural as well as a material object or a practice, and that means or implies that I don't think that algorithms will ever become neutral. There will always be biases in algorithms. Now. I don't think that we can delete biases or get rid of biases, but we should be aware that since technologies are developed by humans, there will always be biases. Now, one way to deal with this is through representation and diversity, because representation and diversity matters, both in terms of the developing teams or this programmer teams, software engineers team developing the technologies that we are using, but also in terms of companies using this, because the more diverse the team, the easier it will be to detect biases. For example, if you're a company which predominantly has young white men in their 20s, and you're using algorithms that are predominantly developed by white men in their 20s, it will be more difficult to detect biases, of course. So diversity and representation matters. And this is also the case in terms of developing the technological products, the algorithms as such, because all the research shows that the more diverse the developing teams, in terms of gender, age, sexuality, ethnicity, the better the products will be. So it's important to think about this, both in terms of opening up technology and the technological profession to different groups in society, and not only to just one group, but also in terms of detecting biases in algorithms. But I don't think that we can ever get around this aspect of biases. And this is important to remember, because here in Sweden, where I am now, we have just this spring started to discuss the use of predictive policing algorithm and face recognition algorithms for police work. This has been done in the US for a long time, and all the research shows that these are biased against people of color. And also research in the US also shows that white crime, predominantly economic crime, goes unseen by this algorithm while it zooms in on crime committed by the poor and of people of color. So it's important. Now, I'm not anti-technology. We should use technology, but we should use it wisely, and we should be aware of the biases that are in there. So this is important to remember.
Most definitely, and very interesting examples you have brought up. So you already hinted in your previous answer, but I just wanted to spell it out. Like, what are the consequences of algorithmic bias? Why is it important to be aware and monitor, in a sense, these biases?
Yeah, I mean, one of the kind of obvious answers here is because of discrimination. I mean, the example of the predictive policing algorithms clearly shows how they discriminate against poor people and people of color. So it's important in terms of avoiding discrimination in the society. But I want to highlight something else, and that is that we are living in, I mean, depending on what kind of sociological notions you want to use, but in data societies, in connected societies, or the bottom lines, we are living in societies, especially here in the West, that are incredibly dependent on technology and on algorithms, platforms. I mean, this spring with the COVID pandemic, we've been dependent on platforms for digital teaching, etc. So we're living in a society where more and more people use digital technologies. And this includes, and now I'm going to go back to the old people, and this includes old people. Old people are using more and more more and more digital platforms. Hence, it's important that we also cater for their needs and their what they want to get out of technologies and platforms. Because a developing team of young white men in their 20s are perhaps not the best to identify what are the needs of older users, which are they are increasing users of technology, research has shown. So this is important, and there lies a business opportunity as well, because older users are sometimes also have more money and are willing to pay for good products. So there lies a business opportunity as well. But it's important. We are increasingly using digital technologies in all different groups, age cohorts, men, women, homosexuals, transsexuals, heterosexuals, white, black, red, etc. So for that reason, it's also very important that these increasingly important tools in our societies are also developed by a diverse team of programmers and developers.
Indeed. And again, it's something that we don't talk a lot about, the ageism, which you referred to also before. I think it's very interesting to highlight. It's also interesting to highlight the business opportunities. I hope our course takers will pay attention to this as well. To wrap up our conversation, and maybe to something that you also hinted at earlier, in which way can businesses and organizations attempt to prevent or correct, if they manage to detect any kind of algorithmic bias at work, how can they act in a sense to minimize the negative consequences of this bias?
Yeah, I'm of the opinion that, I mean, in academia, we sometimes talk about tech solutionism, which basically means that technology will solve all kinds of problems, even the problems that technology itself has created. Now, I'm of the opinion that we should be aware of that. I think there are certain things, such as biases, that will not be able to easily fixed with technologies. So to wrap up, I would like to highlight the importance of technology and people working together. Because as I said before, I'm not anti-technology. I think technology is great, and they do a lot of great things, and which we not the least have seen now during the COVID pandemic, with virus tracing and tracing of the spread of the virus. But it's important to know the limits of technology and where technology cannot be helpful. And I think, so to answer your question, it's important to, yes, use technology, but not be depending on technology only, to always have humans in the loop, to have human in the process, and humans to actually monitor and look at how the algorithms work, and not outsource that job to another algorithm or to another technological solution. And as I mentioned before, diversity and representation matters. So for this to be successful, this kind of monitoring and the kind of human caring and maintaining of the algorithm needs to be done by a diverse team of different people, different ages, different ethnicities, etc.
Thank you so much, Jakob. This was so insightful. I feel that I really have learned a lot about algorithmic bias, and I'm sure our course takers also feel the same way. Thank you so much for taking part in the course.